Hey, what's up everyone? It's Jake from Algo Daily here, and today I wanted to make this video talking about my experiences working at large, big technology companies versus startups. I've been at a number of software companies in the past, and I run algodaily.com, which is a service that helps people land their dream software engineering jobs. I personally have gotten offers or have worked at dozens of software companies, many large and many small, and I've been able to see a wide variety of them, which has provided some of the insight that I have. For further context, I currently work at a large technology company, fintech in particular, that has several thousand engineers and is a well-known established brand. But prior to this, I was working at a number of venture-backed startups, names that you would recognize, and there are some distinct characteristics that differ between the two, and we're gonna dive into those today. So real quick, let's talk about how we'll differentiate between what a startup is and what a big tech company is. I think a good rule of thumb is typically startups have less than 1,000 employees, and I would say a big tech company has more than 1,000 employees. Obviously, there's tons of companies in between, but for the most part, companies that are brand new, off the ground, just received venture funding or are still raising venture funding would go into the startup category. And companies that have thousands of employees, especially if they have thousands of engineers, and are well established and usually profitable in order to sustain the hiring of these expensive engineers, they're big tech companies. And obviously the FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and FANG Moolah, Microsoft, Uber, I don't even know what the other L and A are. These would be big tech still. Let's talk about the recruiting process that the various companies employ. So one thing I've found is that the startups tend to be more outbound. Usually startups are trying to build a reputation and their brand name, so most people, especially skilled senior engineers, won't have heard of these companies. You'll get a lot of recruiting emails and recruiting messages on LinkedIn from startups, although big tech companies certainly reach out as well, but they have the benefit of getting a lot of inbound leads as well. Obviously, everyone wants to work at a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon or a Netflix, so they get tons more applicants than startups. That's not to say it's always easier to break in the door at a startup, but they're more willing to work with people with less experience and teach you along the way. Now, landing an offer is one thing, but after you get in the door, there's still a big difference between the two types of companies. What I've found is that in terms of training and onboarding, big tech companies typically have systems in place where they're able to train you. At startups, because they're usually less resourced, there's not as many people in the company who are willing to take the time to spend with you and figure out directionally what you need, what you might need to know to get working, to get set up. There's much less hand-holding at startups because the expectation is that you hit the ground running. With big tech companies, there's usually a solid training program. Some have formal training programs where, for example, Facebook has the Infamous Boot Camp where you spend a few months just learning about the software methodologies and tools that you'll be using before you write a single line of code or ship a single PR. With the actual work, in terms of what you do software engineering wise, there's really not that much of a difference. For the most part, at startups or at larger companies, I've always pulled off a task off the backlog and, did some investigation, learned what I needed to know, and then executed on the task. And so you'll still be doing, for the most part, the same things that you're doing in any software engineering role. It's just that the time that you're given to onboard might be different depending on the size of the company. With work-life balance though, there was a noticeable difference. At startups, For the most part, I worked about 50 to 60 hours a week. So in my experience, that usually means 9 a.m. to about 7 p.m., sometimes 8 p.m. There's really not pressure from management so much where they say, you know, you have to work these hours. It's more so that because everyone else works at that pace and those hours, you're expected to work alongside your teammates while everyone's still around. At larger companies, there tends to be more of a work-life balance because, as I've said, there's generally more engineering resources that are able to help out and chip in. That's not to say there aren't large tech companies with bad work-life balances and startups with good work-life balances. There's definitely a mix in between, but these are generally what I've seen in terms of trends. Big tech companies, basically everyone I know and myself, it averages out to about 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, 10 to 6, and with slightly less pressure than at startups. Now, everyone wants to grow as an engineer, and this is an area where startups really shine. The learning at a startup is so much faster than at a large tech company because of the constraint that there's less resources around you and there's less people that you can rely on or lean on for help. So you end up learning a ton more, and your scope of work is significantly larger. For example, when I was working at a financial startup, I found myself not only working on the UI for a feature, but also the back-end work. So writing the queries to the database, writing cron jobs, writing all the tests for the infrastructure. Whereas at a large company, it might end up being that there's a testing team that takes care of the automated tests, that there's a job-specific team that just manages those cron jobs, and a separate UI team that just focuses on building out the view. Promotions-wise, it's much easier to level up at a startup than a big tech company. A startup will typically reward its people with titles faster. So you might see someone with just 8 years of experience being at a staff level because of the amount of extra work and scope of responsibilities that they've been assigned throughout their short tenure. Whereas it takes a while at larger companies, unless you're really talented, to get that promotion to the next level. In addition, there's a lot more overhead and red tape, and also a lot more competition by nature of how many people are at larger tech companies. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Finally, something that a lot of people care about, compensation-wise, it's really hard to beat what big tech companies pay. I think it's a well-known fact that FAANG company engineers can be making 2 to 3 times what startup employees make. Now, of course, with startups, you have the chance to get in at the ground floor, and the idea is that the stock options you get will eventually multiply in value and be worth more than your total comp at a large company, or even more. But I do want to throw in the caveat that, in my experience, that's relatively rare. It's hard for a startup to achieve the scale that the FAANG companies have, and I wouldn't bet your whole career on it. So if you're looking for learning and growth and want to take a little bit of a risk, a startup may be perfect for you. Whereas if you are looking for a better work-life balance, a better brand name, and higher initial levels of compensation, larger tech companies are for you. If you like this video and you want to see me give more tips around software engineering careers and breaking into software engineering, please hit the subscribe button and check out algodaily.com. Take care.